It's the Fitness Lab Pittsburgh podcast, a new episode every week. A podcast about movement, part of making your life complete. Fitness Lab Pittsburgh, aka FitLabPGH, brings you interviews with people in the Pittsburgh area who understand movement is part of what makes life complete. Looking for a new movement idea or just want to hear interesting stories about people who make movement a priority? This is the podcast for you. Whether you consider the gym, dojo, or fitness studio your third place, or just want to learn more about movement, activity, and fitness to enhance your life, give FitLabPGH a listen. We interview locals in the Pittsburgh area who make Pittsburgh a great place to move. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Subscribing is free and gives you notifications when we release new episodes. Each podcast episode will be long enough to pique your interest and short enough to hold your attention. Have an idea for an episode? Know somebody we should interview? Or just want to connect with us? Drop us an email, fitlabpgh@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at FITLABPGH. Already a fan of FitLabPGH? Check out our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast for movement professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers weekly interviews with movement professionals featuring topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you enjoy our next interview, starting now. FitLabPGH back with another podcast interview. This time we did not have to go through a bridge or over a tunnel. We are in Bethel Park. This is a little bit atypical for FitLab Pittsburgh, but we are a podcast about movement, part of what makes your life complete. And part of moving is being able to eat healthy food on a regular basis. And let's be honest, not all of us want to spend time doing all of our cooking. Occasionally we like to go out. We like to have a variety of food when we go out. Sometimes we want to splurge. Sometimes we want to eat healthy. But above all, if we have the option, we want to know where our food comes from. We want to eat food that is as fresh as possible. And that brings us to today's guest. If you are not familiar with Vilka Bistro, which is a restaurant in Bethel Park, it's owned by Ed Shvarts. It's in Millennium Shops, and we saw Millennium Shops go up, I guess, about a year and a half ago. It went up. There was a sign for a restaurant or cafe right on the edge of the shops, and you kept driving by on 88 going, I wonder what that's going to be. I wonder what that's going to be. And then the sign went up, and it's like, I wonder when that's going to open. I wonder when that's going to open. And then it opened, and it was kind of like, I wonder if it's any good. I wonder if it's any good. And then I guess a little bit less than a year ago, we went in and tried it for the first time. It's like, wow, this is really good. This is atypical for the South Hills of Pittsburgh. We've been back periodically, and I believe one of these South Hills magazines that writes up articles interviewed the owner and talked about how his goal was to have small plates and fresh food and do something different from anybody else. And we've talked before on the podcast that if you're going to do something, do it better than other people, do it different than other people, or do it ideally. So I think Ed has achieved that, and we were in here last week. He was behind the bar, and I happened to ask him, hey, are you the owner? We got to talking, and here we are a week later. So, Ed, thanks for joining FitLab Pittsburgh to talk to us about how you got here all the way from New York City and why you decided to open up Vilka Bistro. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So my question I always ask everybody for FitLab Pittsburgh, I already know because we chatted for about an hour and a half last week, is I ask people, if you're a Pittsburgh native, why are you still here? If you're not a Pittsburgh native, why the heck are you here? And I guess my question for you is, there's so many people, and I can pick on you a little bit because I grew up in upstate New York. I know New Yorkers, and most people who grew up in New York City believe the earth, the sun, and the moon revolves around New York City, and they can't imagine coming all the way out here to the heartland of America. So what caused you to leave New York City, or actually tell us a little bit about your background growing up?
Okay. Well, I grew up in New York, Brooklyn, Brighton Beach. Traveled all over New York, different opportunities all over the great state, or I guess the city, and then moved on to Baltimore to go to school. And once I graduated, had opportunities to go to different places. Florida, I was probably in 6 different areas in Florida, from Orlando to Daytona, and then back to Orlando, Merritt Island, and then went to work for a couple of hotels at Disney, which was an experience in its own, and had an opportunity to join with a famous steakhouse, and then ended up back in Baltimore, running the same steakhouse franchise out of Baltimore. And then my bosses got promoted and asked me to come to Atlanta and Puerto Rico. And so I traveled quite a bit, opening restaurants, redesigning restaurants. And when I came back to Baltimore from Puerto Rico, that's when I met my wife, who basically was working for a different steakhouse brand at the time. And we met and got married, had our son, and then moved back to Pittsburgh, where she's from.
I think the first question that needs to be brought up is, why did you leave New York City? Because I know a lot of New Yorkers who believe the earth and the sun and the moon, as I said, revolves around New York. And you just said you traveled all over the state. And I know, having grown up in upstate New York, many people from New York City think upstate New York is like Newburgh. And it's not Albany. It's not even Poughkeepsie. So what was it that made you make the decision to say, hey, I want to get out of the big city? I
actually moved to Baltimore to go to school. And that's why, to college. And that's why I moved out of New York.
And I'm always curious, because I do teach in higher education. What did you go to school for?
I went for business marketing.
And I guess one could say what you're doing now and what you've done all your career has been business marketing.
Pretty much. I mean, when you're in this industry, you're running a business, whether it's you're working for yourself or you're working for some of the bigger chains. You're still running a business, and one of the things that you do is you focus on marketing, local store marketing, the four walls. You look at the different variations of just throughout marketing, from doing small baseball associations to things like the Coleman Foundation.
I'm curious, when you went off to college, I mean, I know people are 18 years old. They're like, I want to see something different. Did you anticipate at that time that, hey, I'm going to come back to New York City? Or did you think, okay, I'm leaving New York City, I'm not going to come back other than for visits?
I don't know if I thought that I would not come back. I never liked to close the door, or at least at that point, I never wanted to close the door, because I love New York City. Any New Yorker out there knows that when you're in Manhattan, if you're into the restaurants and nightclubs, I mean, it's a completely different environment than it is mostly anywhere. I would say New York, downtown Manhattan, anything like that, would probably compare it to South Beach or any of those local vibe places that are just, they're a lot of locally owned, chef-owned restaurants. The night scene, the club scene, it's a different way of life. So I definitely, that was one of the biggest things that I missed.
And when you went for business marketing, were you anticipating going in the restaurant business, or did that just kind of fall in your lap from experiences or opportunities?
Well, I grew up working for my uncle, who had 7 restaurants all through New York. He had one upscale dining restaurant, and he had a bunch of sub shops. I guess around here you guys call them hoagie shops, and pizza shops. So I've always been in the industry. So I knew, once it was in my blood, I knew I was going to stay in it. When I went to college, I was bartending and serving tables at Chi-Chi's to pay my way through college. And that was fun in itself. So
I'm curious, you mentioned at the beginning of the interview you grew up in Brooklyn. I know Brooklyn is kind of the hot spot of New York City now, although I imagine when you were growing up, people who lived in Manhattan didn't think of Brooklyn as being, quote unquote, the city. When you were growing up, or even when you first were starting your career, did you expect Brooklyn would be the way it is now?
Never. I never would have thought in a million years that Brooklyn would be what it is now. Brooklyn is a new Manhattan. It has been for the past at least 5 to probably 10 years. Just the level of nightlife, just the level of independently owned restaurants, from the clubs to the restaurants to the housing. when you look at some of these channels, TV channels now that have like the $1 million realtor listings, New York is one of those now up in hip areas that, years ago when I was growing up in the 80s, you could buy a row home for $20,000-$40,000. Now you can't touch them for $1 million, $3 million. They used to be Manhattan, not Brooklyn.
And I know this isn't the main purpose of the interview, but why do you think that happened as somebody who grew up in New York City and had a relative who was in the restaurant business that was experienced with these things? Why do you think all of a sudden Brooklyn has taken off the last, as you said, 5, 7, 10 years?
I think the main part is that when you look at Manhattan, you look at Upper East Side, Upper West Side, when you look at some of these areas, they really kind of maxed out on the rent, just the cost of living. So Brooklyn and some of the other, the Four Corners there really started to kind of welcome people in. Now people that were used to living in Manhattan and doing the film scene, the nightclub scene, they were just completely priced out of the market as far as rent and everything else. So the closest area to move to was then at Brooklyn, and then all of a sudden, just like anywhere else, you start overpopulating an area. Now, what's the verbiage that everybody says? Supply and demand. You got more demand than you do supply. Now rent goes up, everything else goes up, and now you're pushing the creative envelope into Brooklyn, in which it's done in the past many years, and now you have that same atmosphere that Manhattan used to have. So now you have that in Brooklyn and some of the other suburbs, and then you also have it going into basically most of the 5 boroughs are now experiencing that too.
We're talking with Ed Shvarts. He's the owner of Vilka Bistro in Bethel Park. Business marketing is your college degree. You said you bartended and waitered at Chi-Chi's or Chili's?
Chi-Chi's.
You knew you were going to be in some sort of the restaurant business because your uncle was in it and you had basically been forced into it as forced child labor when you were growing up. Now that wouldn't happen, but back then you and I are of similar ages. It's kind of, you will be doing this. So you kind of knew you were going to do that. When you graduate from college, and I know a lot about movement in fitness fields, I know how to find a job for that. How do you decide what you're going to do? Because you could very easily, I would think, if you were a good employee at Chi-Chi's, they would say, hey, we want to put you in the management program. Mm-hmm. And I know from talking to you, you went a little bit higher end than that. Why?
The biggest or the best answer to that is you have to look at what you're looking to do. The restaurant industry is a tough, very tough industry. The quality of life back in the day, restaurant managers are working 55, 60 hours plus, and to go ahead and to get ahead in the game, you have to even work more, less complaining, working more. But you look at the quality of life, you look at the overall experience in the restaurant industry. Those of us that have it in our blood know the meaning of being there, and it's more like, how can I explain it? It's like having guests at your house every day. And it's having friends and guests at your house that you absolutely love and appreciate having them and seeing them every day. And if you find a place that you love being in and the environment you love being in, it's almost like that other saying where if you find what you love, you'll never work another day in your life. That's kind of what somebody that has a love and a passion for this industry, it really is true.
I'm curious. I know one of the things my dad always told me about large corporations is never forget that large corporations exist to perpetuate themselves. Did you know when you graduated from college and you went to work for these large corporations that eventually you'd be owning businesses yourself? And I know you did some franchisees before that. Did you know that at some point when I get settled, when I get some money, when I figure out what I'm going to do, I'm going to be my own boss? Or did you think I'm going to be a career marketer for these large scale restaurants?
I always wanted to own my own. I always thought, and as I'm sure everybody else does, I could do it better. I could do it 100 times more effective than anybody else. But the one good thing, or many good things that I would say for someone to start off with large corporations is that their main focus is on the food cost and the labor side of it. A lot of things, like when I started with and I don't know if I could say their name, it's a big corporation, but they started out doing everything fresh. And then within, I would say about 3 years of being with them, they switched to a lot of frozen items, prepackaged items. And that really was, I think, upsetting to myself and other people that have been in this industry and seen it, from independently owned businesses, that you do it fresh and you do it the right way. But working for a lot of the big corporations, you really do get, it's like boot camp. Best way to describe it. It would be like boot camp 101, where you're thrown in, and as much as they say they hired you for your creativity, they really didn't. They hired you for your basically to open and close the building and to micromanage everything. And at the end of the day, it's the bottom line that really, you're only as good as your bottom line, as your last P&L.
Is there an opportunity to use your creativity at all, or you pretty much you have to fit right within the slots of the big company, because at the end of the day, making money is the bottom line?
Making money is the bottom line. I think as far as your creativity, you have to be creative with your staff. From your back of the house staff to your front of the house staff, you have to create contests, you have to create loyalty, you have to create an environment where, more so now than before, where you reward people for coming in and doing a great job. And at the end of the day, it's your people that build your business, that keep your guests coming back. With the big corporations, it's about the bottom line. I mean, regardless of what anybody says, it's always going to be about the bottom line. There's, when a company, I won't say their name, but when a company creates a reward pin for 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, and that's all you're giving them, you're spending 17 cents on a pin made in China, and you're giving it to a 5-year employee who's been there through thick and thin, who has missed out on birthdays and this and that. And at their 5 year, you're giving them a pin made by somebody in China for 17 cents. Come on. That pretty much says it all. So
I know I've talked to a variety of people. When you're growing up, when you graduate from high school, when you graduate from college, you think you know everything. At some point, do you remember?
You don't?
Right. At some point, do you remember going back to your uncle when he still had his restaurants, when you were kind of a wet behind your ears restaurateur, and trying to tell him how to do things and having him look at you like you didn't know what was going on?
I did. I remember the first day that I went to work for a company. It was a ice cream place that was in the mall, and they were doing an internship program, and it was a corporately run facility. It was a fast food facility, and I'm sitting here talking to a district manager who pretty much was oblivious to anything else but the corporate, tape. And I'm sitting here talking to them and getting some input from him about this, and this, different items. And I go back to my uncle and I go, hey, let me ask you this. What if we did this instead of this? And he looked at me and goes, are you stupid? He goes, is this what you spent money on to go to school for? He goes, because your people are the most important things in your business. He goes, these corporate guys are just here because they need a paycheck. And I go, well, that's not nice to say. That, these guys are here because they've been in the industry, they know the industry. He goes, go talk to so-and-so that's been with me for the past 17 years. He goes, tell me and ask them why they still stay here, why they're still here. He goes, because I won't tell them what to say. But if you ask somebody who is a corporate run employee that has a tenure of maybe 5 years, ask them why they're still here. He goes, and you tell me what the difference is. And that was an eye-opener for me.
Did you kind of disagree with him at first because you hadn't had that much experience in corporate, or did you kind of say, oh, wow, that's a good point?
I just thought he was a jerk. But he was my uncle, so I could say that. But no, I think that there was a value learned from an independent owner who knew you by name, who took care of you because they knew you. They knew your family. They knew that when you called them and said, hey, my grandmother is sick, she's on her deathbed, you took care of them. You gave them the time they needed to be off. No matter how much you needed them, you gave them the time, and you put in that time yourself as an owner, but you took care of that person. You paid them, you did whatever needed to be done. And, I can understand the corporate side of it, which is, okay, you get your 2 days of grievance pay and congratulations. Thanks. I'm sorry for your loss. You could tell the heartfelt sorrow and the heartfelt ownership from a small business owner to a corporate that knew you by a number.
Somebody who wants to go in the restaurant business and their goal is, okay, I like the restaurant business, I like what I do. Can they make more money in corporate, or can they make more money running their own business? I mean, obviously, if they hit the right market with their own business, they can sell out, like when McDonald's was invented 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. But just in general.
I think that's a tough question to answer. I think that corporate restaurants have a set dollar amount that they pay certain positions, and you're never really going to move beyond that. I think that you will get your 1.5%, maybe 2% raise here and there from a corporate standpoint, no matter what you do. You could work 7 days a week. You could be a superstar. At the end of the day, this is what your salary is. Surely your bonuses come into play with that. But I think for an independent owner that has the love for this industry and has the aspirations to grow into multiple locations, I think that coming in on the ground floor and working your way up and proving to that small business owner that you're there to be, beside them, I think that the reward, if it's the right ownership, I think the reward can be surpassed by any corporate means.
You mentioned you met your wife while she was working at a competitor, and I'm assuming you ended up in Pittsburgh because she said Pittsburgh's home and we're moving home.
Well, she kind of wrapped me around her finger, kind of thing. They're always right. Am I right? So happy wife, happy life. Is that what it says? I think that's written in the books, the Book of Love, or is that the edited version? But yeah, I mean, when you look at the cost of living, a lot of her family was here from the Pittsburgh area and still in the Pittsburgh area. So it just made sense when we came back to visit several times. It made sense to really look for a home here. So,
and I know you moved back here and did a variety of corporate jobs and franchise things. When you moved back here, was there a plan, okay, within X number of years, we're going to open a restaurant? Or was it kind of like, okay, we're going to move back here and see if the opportunity presents itself?
Well, the goal was always to open a restaurant. That was always my, I guess I would call it my passion, my love to open a restaurant. I had worked for a franchise corporation. And after 5 years of working for them, the president, CEO, the owner of the company sat down with myself and made me an offer to buy 3 stores. And we did that. And then within 2 years, I grew that 3 stores to 9 locations, some of the busiest ones in the Pittsburgh area. And so I really, by 2016, we had reached not only sales, but in personal achievement, more so than any other franchisee in the Pittsburgh area and in some other areas as well. But we had hit some seriously high goals that I sat there at one point and just, I sat there with my management team at a bar one night after getting off at late one night. I think we had 12 different revenue centers going, 12 different places going, and we made some serious money in that one night. And we just sat there and we go, how the heck did we get this pulled off? And that was one of those times where you go, wow, this is what it's about. But we just happened to drive past the location here, saw that it was for lease. It was a brand new location. There was nothing here. There was gravel where we're sitting now. And we came back And we looked at it, both of us. We looked at it and said, "This is the place that we want to do it."
We've been talking for a little bit over 20 minutes. We haven't exactly explained. You meet somebody in the grocery store. They say, "Hey, what do you do?" And you say, I own Vilka Bistro. What is Vilka Bistro? I mean, obviously, it's a restaurant, but what's the elevator speech to encourage people to come and visit?
The elevator speech, I guess the biggest thing is we want to be that local place that people come to where they know they can get fresh, quality food for a reasonable price. The biggest misconception with us is that people walk in, they think we're expensive. And we're not. We're, like I said before, we're champagne taste and a beer budget. And that's what I try to explain to people is like, our fish is brought in fresh 48 hours after it's caught. Our scallops are fresh. They're not drenched in bleach like, you get at the grocery stores. Our meats are hand cut. Everything is made here fresh by our guys in the back. We inspire them to create our new menu that we came out in October with. We change our menu 3 times a year. A lot of the guys in the kitchen helped create the menu. Now, one of the things that we do that most restaurants don't do, corporately or privately owned, is we actually give them a percentage back for the items that are on the menu that they created. So that creates more of a personal feel for these guys. They're personally involved in it. And that's what I try to explain to people, that we really are not like any other restaurant in the South Hills. We could have gone downtown. We could have gone Mount Washington. We could have gone into different areas that are, I would say, tourist traps, if you will. But we really wanted to find a home in a local community that we can not only just support the community, but be a part of the actual bedrock of the community.
And when you were first starting to look around with your wife, were you thinking South Hills, or were you just saying, we're going to look and see if we find a place that feels right to us and based on the demographics looks like it's a good opportunity long term?
We definitely wanted to do something in the South Hills because I kind of adopted the, she's always been from Pittsburgh. So she, like everybody else in Pittsburgh, doesn't cross bridges and rivers. It's like the holy war if you do that. But we really wanted to do something in the South Hills. We live in the South Hills, and we really wanted to be part of the community in the South Hills. That's why we did that here.
Starting a restaurant as somebody who's experienced in the field, is it easier to start with a blank slate or to go into a place that has already had another restaurant or restaurants that have then ceased to be in business for whatever reason?
I think it's not easy in any stretch of the imagination. I think it's depending on the previous restaurant that was there. If you're buying the name and it has a good name and a steady name and people like the quality of what was there before and you're not changing the name, I think if you're buying into it, you're buying into something that's already been established. You're buying into, it's basically the way I look at it, it's yours to screw up, basically. It's a lot, I would say probably it's a lot harder to building something that is not known because the brand name is not known. So you have to work twice as hard to brand the name, to make people appreciate what you are there for and what you have. When you buy an existing location, you're buying also a lot of the staff that's there. You're buying some of the good and bad things that people do, the good and bad habits, I should say. But with a new place like here, we had over 400 applications. We only chose 40. So that gives you an idea of what we were looking for. But yeah, I think depending on how you look at it, in my personal opinion, starting something brand new from scratch without brand awareness, you have a tougher time building the brand.
I would imagine, though, you're also not taking on other people's employer problems with the people that work for them, or if somebody has a preconception that, well, you make the margarita or you make the steak differently than they used to make it, it's no good anymore.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, people come in, they and I've seen it time and time again when you have new ownership coming in, There's a restaurant nearby that the guy owned it for 20 some years, sold it. He's ready to retire. He sold it. Another guy bought it. Definitely wasn't the guy to run the place. He had it for about a year. Really brought down the name even more. Sold it to another guy who was an absentee owner, which you cannot be. You have to be involved day to day. You basically have to sleep here, for the most part, figuratively speaking, of course, even though I do have a bench with my name on it. But you can't be an absentee owner, and that guy closed up within a year. So
we're talking with Ed Shvarts. He's the owner of Vilka Bistro in Bethel Park. I'm curious, I know you grew up as a restaurant guy. You knew at some point you were going to have your own restaurant. Your wife kind of said, we're moving to Pittsburgh and I'm not crossing bridges or going through tunnels. So you were kind of set in the South Hills. What type of food does Vilka Bistro serve, and how did you decide on that? Because I know from talking to you off recording, you've worked in a variety of corporate jobs, and you could probably do anything literally from deep fried chicken fingers and frozen fries all the way up to Kobe beef. So why did you decide on what Vilka Bistro is, and what is Vilka Bistro?
The reason we chose our menu, when we opened up at first, we opened up in I guess winter of last year. December 6th was our first day open. When we started putting the menu together, we took a long time putting that menu together, but we wanted to focus in on freshness, number one. Number two, comfort food, because of the time that we were going to be opening. And we really wanted to focus on the overall feel and atmosphere of the restaurant. What went well with the actual decor? What should people expect in this restaurant? And that's what helped us create the menu at first. And then we...
How would you describe the menu to somebody who says, well, what do you serve, or what are you?
We are... our lunches are different from our dinners. Our lunches vary from a price range between $8 to $12. You can get everything from a California grilled chicken to a Big B grilled chicken to a build your own burger. We have hummus. We have wings. We have all your favorites that you like at a beer and shop place. Or you can get upscale salads like autumn salad, which has probably 12 different ingredients in it. All of our dressings are made fresh in-house. Nothing's bought store at at a distributor or whatever. You're not getting 30 gallons of ranch dressing that you're holding in your walk-in for a 6-month period. And then after a while, it's blue cheese. But everything is made fresh here. All of our dressings are made fresh to match the salads and the taste of the salads. So to round it off, to answer your question, the lunch and the dinner are completely different. Our filet, 8-ounce filet, for example, it's a all-natural grass-fed out of Colorado, no hormones, and it's an 8-ounce filet for $29. The average market, when we did our survey, and by survey I mean we ate a lot at different restaurants. This is why I have a
market research.
Market research. That's what I'm expending it at. That's my excuse on my taxes. The average in the area is a 6-ounce filet for about $32. When you get into an 8-ounce filet of our quality, you're in the upper 30s. We're offering that for $29. Our crab cakes are super lump crab meat, very little filler. And those are $26, and you get 2 of them. So when you look at the overall menu, our hand-cut steaks, we hand-cut our own Delmonico's. Our strips are $21 for a 12-ounce hand-cut, and it melts in your mouth. Our scallops, one of our best sellers. Like I said, they're not bleached. They're natural sea scallops.
And for somebody who's listening and going, well, I can go to fill in your favorite chain and pay half that on a dinner special. What's the advantage of serving fresh steak or serving scallops that aren't soaked in bleach? What's wrong with scallops soaked in bleach?
Well, take a look at our scallops. Come in and get a couple of our scallops and then go to the grocery store and get their scallops and put them in water and see what happens. I guarantee you, if anybody's ever taken a penny, a really crappy looking penny, and put it on a plate with Coke or Mountain Dew, and you can shine the heck out of a penny with that, then you'll understand.
So the filler or whatever they put in the scallops is essentially there as a preservative, but it also takes up volume in the scallop. Is that correct? There
is. If you go to the grocery store and you go to some more chains, like the fish markets or whatever the case is, we won't mention any of those that are out there in the South Hills Mall area, but we won't mention their names.
Remember, FitLab Pittsburgh is about locally owned businesses, which is why we're interviewing Vilka Bistro.
Yes, locally owned. But if you look at some of those places, they have scallops that are injected with water to make them look bigger. So especially when you go to the supermarket and you see these huge scallops, and you're going, holy moly, those things are huge, and they're, X amount of dollars per pound. By the time you put it on your skillet or when you put it in your pan, and shrinkage is real, people. Shrinkage does happen, not just in cold water. But when you look at how much that product actually shrinks, it's because all that water evaporates in that heat, and you get left with this little scallop that is literally half the size of what you bought, and you're still paying per pound with all that water. So,
and is this in the processing somewhere up the line before it gets to the supermarket or the chain? They do that so they can sell it for more, sell it for more, sell it for more, sell it for more.
Correct.
Somebody's listening to this and they're wondering, why fresh food? I mean, I know I was talking to you last week and you said the only things that are frozen here are peaches and our shrimp. And actually, I'm going to say you lied to me jokingly, because apparently from reading one of your reviews, your ice cream is also frozen.
Yes. Well, that has to be, because nobody wants silly putty on their plate.
So somebody's listening to that. And obviously, fresh food, as we all know, if we go and we buy fresh green beans versus canned green beans or frozen green beans, it's more expensive. Somebody's looking to go out for a meal. And for most people, when they go out to eat, it's to some extent a celebratory occasion. They want to do something. They want to get something different or something that they can't make at home. Why fresh versus something that's frozen? I think you've done a great job of explaining why with the scallops, because you're probably going to get better flavor. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, you'll get a comparable amount of scallop or possibly even more. Why other things fresh? Why not use the freezer like so many other restaurants use?
Well, the difference in the freezer stuff or the frozen stuff that you get from other places like supermarkets and other restaurants, chains, with all those products, there's a reason why they last on a shelf for 18 months to 24 months. It's all the chemicals and all the salt and all the byproducts and everything else that they're putting in there, because let's face it, like I said before in the program, it's food costs, it's bottom line numbers. And if I can get a cryovac frozen steak from, somewhere in Middle East, or not Middle East, Midwest town USA, that is in desperate need of, somebody like some of these major distributors coming in and buying up all my product, and they put in, all the salt and sodium and all this other stuff to make it last for 6 months, 8 months. Think about what you're eating. Think about what you're putting in your body. Think about the lack of the health that you're getting, and that's why most people feel so down when they eat a heavy meal, because it's all that chemical and byproduct that you're putting into your body. You look at these canned, like my kids absolutely loved canned fruit cocktails. But when you look at the amount of sugar and stuff that's in it to make it last 19 months on the shelf, it makes your hair fall out. So when you look at items that are fresh here, our freezer, like you said, ice cream, shrimp, peaches, even we just added blackberries to the freezer list because they're not in season anymore. So we have to get them in frozen. But when you look at the items that we put in our freezer versus what we have fresh, I won't allow something that is not fresh, hand cut, and comes in here to be served. Shrimp, because of the way they're caught by the thousands of pounds, they have to be. That's just the way the industry is. Your non-seasonal fruit, you're as much as we'd love to buy local, and by local I mean PA, Eastern PA, Western PA, Ohio, from some of our farmers out there. Sometimes you have to go to California, or now you apparently in California you can get smoked peaches, from what I hear, because of all the fires. But strawberries and stuff like that. So you have to go outside depending on the season. So I think there's a lot of health benefits to serving fresh. It doesn't weigh you down. You can reuse that. You can reheat that same strip that you got here fresh on your date night with your wife, with your girlfriend, and in the morning you can make steak and eggs, and it's still got that fresh smell, that fresh taste as it did when you had it last night.
I know that there are huge numbers of restaurants in the Pittsburgh area and other areas, and I know that there are certain restaurants in the South Hills that I go to, Vilka Bistro being one of them, and I can walk out of there and, for lack of a better term, not feel like I just ate a gut bomb, and not feel it 5, 6, 7, 8 hours later and going, ooh, it was good, but I feel like crap. And I know there's other places, just from experience I go to, it's like now I preferentially don't go to them, not because maybe the food doesn't taste good, but I also can remember what I ate 4, 5, 6 hours later. I just don't feel good about it. Is that due to the fact that the places that I feel better are probably using fresher foods with less salt and other preservatives in them?
I think so. I think it has a lot to do with it. I'm not a doctor or anything, although I play one on TV in my other life. But I think it has a huge factor in how you feel when you walk out of here. You could eat a steak from one of the chain places and just feel like you want to take a nap afterwards. You eat a steak here and you want to go frolicking through the woods. Not that everybody should frolic, but if you want to do that, you can. But it gives you notice a big difference.
And I'm curious, as somebody who's made a career in the restaurant industry, for somebody who's listening and they're going, okay, I've been to Vilka Bistro, I like it, but I want to expand my horizons. How can you figure out in advance, or can you not, where are the places that are not going to make me feel like a gut bomb? Where are the places that are going to use mostly fresh food? I mean, obviously you say on your website, you're saying on this podcast, I've seen some interviews or some reviews on various publications that you do that, but other places don't do that. Or you may be traveling and saying, boy, I want to eat out. How can you, or what can you look for to maybe find out what's the good stuff and what's the not so good stuff?
I think if you look at, if you're a foodie, or if you're just somebody that wants a really good meal, I think you look at some of the reviews out there. I think word of mouth is huge. One of the things that we do is we work well with some hotels in the area that do refer us to their people that are staying at their hotel, their guests, which is a huge thing for us, because that means that if we're being referred by other people, I want to say in the service industry, like the hotels, I think that's very impressive to us. Not that we pay them off or anything, because that doesn't happen. Maybe it does, but not here. But I think that if you're looking to, and I hope this answers that question, maybe it does. But I think if you look at more independently owned, chef type of places, I'll tell you this: when I was in Baltimore, there was a restaurant, and it was a chef-owned restaurant. The chef was Cindy Wolf, and I mean, she was the soup Nazi, if you will. Her food, if it was up in that window for more than 10 seconds, that server was having a bad day. Because that's how anal she was about getting her food out there. Her food was fresh. Everybody in the downtown area knew that was the place to go if you really wanted good food. So I think if you're new to the area, or you're just looking for something new, and really you don't want to break the bank, if you will, I think that you ask around, research it online. I think you'll find some of the better places out there. We're not always going to be the best, and I'm man enough to say that. As much as I love to say that my restaurant is the best, my food and my servers are probably the best. As much as I like to think so, there's other that are better.
And I'm curious also, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you change your menu 3 times a year. We all know that whether it's in Pittsburgh or if it's other places, whether it's independently owned or it's corporate, there are a huge number of restaurants that you pretty much know you can go in November. You can go November of next year. You can talk to your friend who went 5 years ago in November or May, and it's the exact same menu. So on the one hand, that could be really good because the chefs could get really good at prepping it. They could maybe put their own spin on it. On the other hand, as a chef, it could get rather boring. But why the decision to change 3 times a year? I guess, A, why the decision to change it all? And B, why 3 times a year versus, say, twice a year or 4 times a year?
Well, to answer both those questions, I think, number one, to change it all, I think you have to keep, just like everything, marriage is work, relationships are work, same as your menu. They're all work. You get tired of the same old, same old. Imagine going home and having meatloaf every day of your life, or having some form of meatloaf every day of your life. It gets old. And I have nothing against those restaurants that haven't changed their menu in 20 some years. The original owners had it. Their grandkids inherited it, and it's the same old, same old. There's a thing for comfort food. And I think in the Pittsburgh area, in the South Hills, there's plenty of places that have that. Multiple generations have been enjoying the same, dishes for many, many years. And there's nothing against that. I just don't think that, I think people's tastes are evolving. I think people's desire for different things, different tastes, different adventures in food are evolving. You have so many cooking shows now that showcase the different variations of how you can use a star fruit, or how you can use a pomegranate, or how you can use, different things in your refrigerator, different fruits, different vegetables. So I think people are trying to get creative and want to get creative. So I think that offering people a menu that changes 3 times a year gives them that. And also, in the summertime, do most people want to eat a heavy, filet or a heavy steak? No. Some people want a nice fresh salad or a nice fresh sandwich, or something lighter than what they normally would get. So I think that's a very good thing to do. Listen, I'm a creature of habit. I love my bone-in ribeyes, and I love my bone-in New York strips. And if somebody ate a bone-in New York strip here, let's say 6 months ago, and we changed the menu, if you call us ahead of time and say, "Hey, I really like I'll get it for you." I have no problem getting it for you. Just like when I owned my other franchise, if you wanted a certain flavor, not a problem. We'll make it for you. Getting that product is not that big of a deal for me. I would rather get it in and make you happy, because that's what you really liked, and that's what I would do.
We've been talking with Ed Shvarts. He's the owner of Vilka Bistro and Millennium Shops on Route 88 in Bethel Park. Ed, thanks for taking time to talk to FitLabPGH, being a great example of a locally owned business and describing the difference between fresh food and prepackaged food, and why, if movement is a priority, you might want to think about emphasizing fresh food when you eat out at restaurants.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys coming in.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of FitLabPGH, brought to you by Moving to Live. Intro and exit music is Marathon Man by Jason Shaw. Check out the show notes for contact info for our latest guests, links to other information mentioned in the episode, and links to our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise for professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Your free subscription gets you notified when we release a new episode. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email us at fitlabpgh@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at fitlabpgh and like us on Facebook. If you enjoy our podcasts, please tell your friends about us and consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Make FitLabPGH a go-to place to learn more about movement in the Pittsburgh area. Until next time, keep on moving.